guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through my October wrap up. Now for the month of October, I'm happy to say I read a total of 8 books and also wrapped up a few books that have been, let's just say, a long time coming. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the video. The first book I completed, I have an entire reading vlog dedicating the entire process from beginning to end, but that is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I finally started my Wheel of Time journey this month, and honestly, I'm thrilled about the entire thing. Going into this book, I will say I had kind of unknown expectations. I feel like there are so many people that love this series and there are so many people that just think it's okay or just not for them. And based on all of the different opinions, I just really couldn't figure out like where I would stand with picking this book up. But honestly, I found The Eye of the World to be a very enjoyable, really smart introduction in what I know is going to be a very long and complex fantasy series full of so many different characters and epic plot lines. But the first book honestly is kind of like simple in a way that I personally found to be very, very charming. So The Eye of the World is at its heart a quest story. We follow Rand and a few of his friends who all live and come from a very remote town that's full of farmers and like sheep herders. Rand himself is not really interested in traveling or living a great life. He really just wants to be a farmer just like his father. Unfortunately for him, at the beginning of the story, his town is attacked by creatures that he thought only existed in legend. Trollocs. And he's quickly informed by an outsider that him and his friends are currently being targeted by these Trollocs because they think one of them is basically a chosen one figure and they don't know which of them it is. So from there, Rand and this group of people travel from this small town to a faraway magical city in hopes of kind of finding answers. In the story, again, it is a classic quest setup. You're traveling from place to place. You're reading from a variety of perspectives, but primarily from Rand, which honestly is a great way to learn about a fantasy world because Rand knows nothing and neither do we. So basically discovering everything through Rand's eyes just made sense and it quickly just kind of pulled you into the story. I found just how classic it was to be very charming. It didn't necessarily blow me away, but what it hinted at this sort of like larger Wheel of Time and like ages come and gone, as well as its references to the past and sort of these other civilizations that have since crumbled, as well as to this magic system that currently can only be harnessed by women, and if men touch it, it basically corrupts them to an evil source at its core. But now it appears the Dark One is trying to walk this fantasy world again, and it's just kicking off the entire story, basically. And I did like it. Again, I wouldn't say the plot overall blew my mind, but I just found the whole thing to be really enjoyable and easy to read. I also found the writing style to be incredibly approachable. It wasn't too heavy on the description. It was really just like a fun, classic setup. I really kind of hearkened the reading experience to how I felt when I was reading The Assassin's Apprentice. Not my favorite book of Robin Hobb's either, but also was just like a charming, solid first book to what turns into a very epic story. So The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan was fun. I think I'd give it like a 3.5, 3.75 stars. I'm really looking forward to picking up The Great Hunt. My favorite characters so far, I would say, are the Wisdom and Moraine. I think the magic and how it's only attached to women is a really interesting concept, and I'm curious to see how that will continue to play out. But again, I'm thrilled to have finally started this series, and I'm looking forward to more books. From there, I was craving a bit of mischief and murder, so I picked up a few kind of murder mystery, dark academia stories. The first one was A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee, and this book, before picking it up, had a lot of hype. So I honestly was really looking forward to it and was also curious to see where I stood with reading it. And honestly, I really enjoyed this book from beginning to end. This is a classic dark academia story. It's set in a remote and very rich all-girls boarding school. It's full of creepy history and pretentious students, and I just could not put it down. This story follows our main character Felicity, and she is just returning back at Dalloway after a year away after the tragic passing of her girlfriend. She's excited to come back to school, finish out her senior year, and finally move on. She finds herself in her old room and is also beginning to become haunted by memories of the past. Specifically, her room is kind of connected to the occult and witchcraft, which Dalloway itself has a large history with. Notoriously, there were 5 girls called the Dalloway Five who killed one of their own in ritual sacrifice, also subsequently died one after another associated with witchcraft. Felicity herself is trying to turn away from the dark side of Dalloway and just focus on her studies. With the arrival of a new student, Ellis, who is also like a Pulitzer Prize winning method writer, she slowly begins to get pulled back into the occult and is also trying to solve the question of if magic even existed in the first place. Again, this book is dark and creepy. So much of the story itself definitely focuses on Felicity. Not only is she working through the trauma of losing her girlfriend and also kind of remembering a lot of those repressed memories from the past couple of years, but also with Ellis's research for her book, Felicity finds herself falling headfirst again into her obsession with the Dalloway Five and the occult surrounding the school itself. I really enjoyed this book. I feel like the story itself really escalated in that as a reader, you're kind of questioning everything that surrounded the plot itself. Not only was the author kind of playing with you in that you didn't know if you could trust Felicity's point of view, but she also pointed out to you how problematic that point of view actually is. So it just made you unsure how to proceed from beginning to end. Not to mention the question of, is witchcraft real, or is it kind of all in our heads as a reader or in Felicity's head, was very central to the story. This book was dark, it was menacing, it was toxic. It's also full of so much pretentious vibes, which I feel like is key when it comes to a dark academia story. You kind of want to hate everyone, be intimidated by them, and also still really enjoy reading from their point of views. But I feel like this book escalated in some really fascinating ways. I do feel like perhaps the magic could have been explored a bit more, but nonetheless, I found this to be an incredibly entertaining, really engaging, dark academia sort of mystery story. If you like books set in remote boarding schools, this is definitely one to check out, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I picked up The Forest of Girls by June Her. This is a historical fiction story set in the 1400s in the Joseon era in Korea, and it's also a murder detective style story. It follows our main character Hwani, who in her childhood, her and her sister got lost in the woods near their family home, and once they were discovered, they actually fell upon a very gruesome crime scene. Years later, the family has since moved away, but Hwani's father learns that 13 other girls have since gone missing in this forest on Jeju Island, so he travels back to try to solve the case and inevitably goes missing himself. So Hwani decides to take up the mantle of this mystery, travel there, and try to find her father and also save these missing girls. I enjoyed this book. I really love June Her's other story, The Silence of Bones. I was really looking forward to picking up her new release. One of the strengths of the story, and just in general with June Her's books and writing, is that she uses so much historical references and inspiration. It's not just a setting or a backdrop for the story to kind of unfold, but it's very integral to the plot itself. So if you really like thoughtful, historical-based sort of mystery stories, June Her's mystery books are fantastic ones to pick up. Another large part of the story was also Hwani kind of reconnecting with her estranged sister Mei Wall as they kind of work together to try to discover what happened to their father, and also both of them confronting their own perceptions of not only their father but their family life and learning to sort of love and rely on each other once again. The sisterly bond within this book is definitely very central to the plot and was a part of the story I personally really enjoyed. Just kind of seeing them begin to rely on one another and kind of lean on each other's strengths I thought was really admirable. Ultimately, I found the actual mystery to be a bit predictable in terms of what actually happened, and so I would say the ending was something I was able to guess, but the historical setting and the overall character work I thought was present in the story I personally really enjoyed. Overall, I would say I would give this book about a 3 stars. I thought it was a very solid mystery story. I really appreciated a lot of the writing. Because I was able to kind of guess the ending, I do kind of have to rate it there. Next up, I was creating some fun, fluffy, steamy romances that were also seasonally appropriate, so I picked up 2 spooky witch-centered romance stories. The first one is The X Hex by Erin Sterling, which is a pen name for Rachel Hawkins. This is a fun, witchy, second chance romance that's set in a small, atmospheric Halloween fall town. And basically the setup of the story is 9 years ago, our main character Vivi nursed her broken heart like any young witch would, with bubble baths and alcohol and pretending to hex her ex-boyfriend. She really did not think that this hex would have any sort of effect at all. all, and for the most part it did not. But 9 years later, when her ex Reese comes back to town, she quickly realizes that the ex might not only have worked, but also is seemingly putting the town itself in danger. So now Vivi and Reese have to work together to overturn this hex, and slowly along the way, they quickly realize that their feelings for each other may perhaps never went away. I personally thought this book was a lot of fun. For one, I really love a second chance romance, and because this is actually a dual perspective story, you're able to read from both the characters' points of view, which I feel like helps, especially in romance stories, to kind of understand the stakes and the other person's emotions very, very quickly. And for both of them, they kind of viewed the other as the one that got away. So the tension that kind of existed from the beginning was immediately there, which made the story itself quite a bit of fun. And in general, I appreciated the magical backdrop to this story. I think while obviously the romantic plot lines are always fun and like the back and forth that's present within a romance story is great, but also having like magical hijinks and ghosts and other types of cursed items also be propelling the plot forward just creates for not only fun scenarios, but also kind of a nice breakup from the usual tropes you find within romance stories. Overall, I did find this book charming. I appreciated Vivi and Reese's story. I also really liked the sort of Stars Hollow-esque setting, small town, nosy people, lots of magic. It overall just had a great level of ambiance and fun. I wouldn't say the story itself blew my mind. I wouldn't say it's my favorite romance I ever read, but did I read it in like one day? Yes. Was I able to put it down? No. And overall, I just found it to be a really engaging romance story, and I think I would give it like 3 stars, 2.75 stars. It was honestly a lot of fun and a great seasonal romance option. And then the second Halloween romance story I picked up was Paybacks, A Witch by Lana Harper, and this is the first book to what I believe is actually going to be a multi-book series, which is always great. I love a romance with a companion novel following a different set of characters. It makes for a great time. And this follows our main character, Emmy Harlow, and she is a witch, but not a very powerful one. And this is in part because she hasn't been to her hometown, Thistle Grove, in years. After a bad breakup, she decided to sort of break away from her family, from the expectations of magic, and kind of carve her own path in a more traditional, non-magical way. However, she is returned home at the beginning of this book to basically partake in a family tradition in the town, where basically the different magical families compete against each other for kind of having the mantle of power within this specific town. And shortly after her arrival, she runs into an old classmate, Talia, and discovers that she also had her heart broken by the same guy that broke her heart all those years ago, and also realizes that her best friend Lyndon recently got her heart broken as well by this dude. So clearly not a great guy, but a perfect reason to bring all these women together to kind of hatch their revenge, to take down this jerk, but also kind of reclaim the town's power and try to shift the power balance that's kind of been in control of this one family for so many years. But as Emmy and Talia begin to spend more time together, Emmy begins to realize that she may in fact actually have feelings for Talia, and that is kind of where the romance begins to spark. I really enjoyed this book. I do feel like there's a few elements of the overall plot that I had to suspend my disbelief on, but parts of the story I really enjoyed was one, I felt like the magic was actually pretty well fleshed out. Again, it wasn't just so much of a backdrop. It actually had like little elements of world building. Like I wouldn't call this an epic fantasy story, but there were just parts of the magic that were explained that were really cool. Like for example, each of the different magical families in this town has a different type of magic, and then obviously all of this culminates into the magical competition, which was really fun to read. It was like watching trials with different application of magic, which I really wasn't expecting to encounter with such detail within a romance book, and I thought that added a really fun kind of action-packed element to this book. As well as the town, I felt like had fantastic ambiance. Obviously, I love a fall, small town setting. That's something I really enjoyed within the X Hex, and that was definitely present in this book too. It just had a great fall vibe, which just made it perfect for an October read. The romance between Emmy and Talia I appreciated. I do feel like it was a bit more of a slow burn. I do love that the origin of them linking up again was to get revenge, and then them quickly realizing that they actually had feelings for each other. There were a few cheesy moments, particularly with Emmy, that I kind of had to roll my eyes with, but Talia and Lyndon especially in this book were some of my favorite characters. I really enjoyed reading them, and I do feel like this book also kind of provides provided some extra plot lines outside of the romance that kind of gave it a little more oomph from an emotional point of view. A large part of this book was also Emmy kind of coming to terms with and accepting her own magical heritage and her family, and kind of coming to terms with why she left. Was that actually the right choice for her? So I do appreciate that we had elements of character growth from our main character, which I appreciated at the end of this book. Again, I really enjoyed this town setting. I'm looking forward to future books kind of set in Thistle Grove, because again, I do feel like there were some elements of world building there, like some really interesting components to the magical backdrop that this book provided. I liked this quite a bit, and at the end of the day, I gave it like a 3.75 stars. The next book I was able to complete for the month of October was the Mime Order by Samantha Shannon. I'm so happy I got to this book this month. It's definitely high on my list of reads because I did not want to let too much time pass between reading the Bone season and picking this book up and basically forgetting all the things that happened in the Bone season again, as I had already just reread the Bone season. But anyway, I'm rambling now. The Mime Order I thought was a really great builder off of a lot of the things that were established within the Bone season. In fact, I felt like there was a lot more world building, and a lot more world building in the places I wanted more information from. Particularly this particular book focused on the Syndicate, the underground gangs that kind of rule London within this fantasy world. But a bit more context about the story. The Bone season series basically follows our main character Paige, and she is a clairvoyant. And in this world and in London, if you have any type of clairvoyant ability, you basically have to either live a double life and hide your powers, or if you're very powerful or unable to hide it, the only way you're able to kind of get protection and work to join an underground gang. Otherwise, you risk getting arrested and kind of having your life turned upside down. At the beginning of book 1, Paige herself is arrested and is sent to this faraway colony of Oxford. There she basically discovers that there is another race of creatures that perhaps might be controlling things from behind the scenes, and she also begins to train more in her powers, and also just slowly begins to discover not only more about herself but sort of the political maneuverings at play. In this second book, things really explode. Again, the Syndicate itself is deeply explored, and just learning more about how the underground gang system worked and more about the different mime lords and mime queens. Super cool. Both the Bone season and the Mime Order read so quickly. From a plot point of view, they're very hard to put down. This book spent a lot of time kind of setting the groundwork, which I can appreciate, and the overall ending of this was so explosive, and I feel like books 3 and 4 are going to be absolutely mind-boggling, and I do not know where they're going to go, but I cannot wait to read them. Overall, I will continue to say that Paige Mahoney is a fantastic main character to read from. She's so easy to root for. She's powerful, she's intuitive, she's emotional, but she's also flawed. Also makes her a very dynamic character, which I can appreciate. You might not always agree with her decisions, but you can also pretty much understand how she always got there. I honestly cannot wait to see where the next books in this series takes off. I would say I enjoyed book 2 more than book 1, which really gives me a lot of hope because I feel like I'm just going to like each book within this world more and more. I just feel like the clairvoyant powers are so cool. They all have to do with kind of the supernatural undead world, and the applications of how people are able to access this sort of other realm is all very different. Paige herself is a dreamwalker, which means she can kind of control other people's minds and actions. Some people can control spirits, other people are soothsayers, and there's just so many different classifications within the clairvoyant world, which is just so cool. But yes, I really enjoyed the Mime Order. I would give it like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. Can't wait for the third book. I need to pick it up soon and read it. And the last 2 books are 2 books I finished from the month prior. The first one is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, and I loved this middle grade book. I already kind of talked about how much I was enjoying this book in my September wrap up. I was about halfway through then, but great news, I finished this up, and wow, what an explosive ending, and truly just like a wonderful first book to a new middle grade series. It's imaginative, it's full of magic and adventure, and following Amari as our main character is just fantastic, and I cannot wait to read more books in this world. I feel like this particular middle grade series has a chance of being a very long one, and also one that I will be dedicating a lot of time to because it's just fantastic. The premise of the story is Amari has never given up that her older brother Quentin is still alive, despite what everyone around her tries to say. So when she discovers a ticking briefcase in his closet with an invitation to try out for the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs, Amari quickly accepts in hopes of finding clues to what happened to her brother. From there, she's transported to a new supernatural world and basically realizes that there is a school that basically trains you to become part of this supernatural existence, and in reality our world is full of monsters and fairies and other types of magical creatures. And she also realizes that her brother Quentin was actually one of the most powerful agents within this organization. So Amari decides to dedicate herself to becoming an agent just like her brother in hopes of not only saving him but also cracking the mystery of what happened. This book is just so charming. First and foremost, it has a magical trial element, obviously following Amari as she's thrown headfirst in this new supernatural world. There's just so much to see and so much to learn, and obviously she's competing for a very limited space within the agent tryouts. She's also competing against children who have been preparing for this her entire life, and you see her not only stand up against bullies but also make friends along the way and discover and embrace her own powers. Also, just learning more about the borough itself was really fascinating. I just think it's a really thought out and whimsical middle grade fantasy world, and seeing Amari just face so many different challenges with her head held high. She was just such a fantastic middle grade heroine, and I just loved reading about her so much. And honestly, the twists and turns of this story really had me surprised and gasping at the end. I'm really looking forward to book 2 within this world, and I can't wait to see what Amari gets up to next. But yeah, I just thought this was such a fantastic middle grade series. I'd give this first book like a 4.5, 5 stars. I think it's just such a wonderful introduction to a new middle grade fantasy world. Like, what's there not to love? Amari and the Night Brothers, excellent, great middle grade. And the very last book I completed for the month of October, I am so happy to say I have finally finished it, and that is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I have been reading this book since May, so the fact that it's finally done feels almost surreal, like not quite real, but it is. I finished this book, and I do have to say I enjoyed it. I don't want the time that it took for me to read it to be a huge red flag about my general thoughts and feelings about this book. That had much more to do with me trying to also juggle the other books on my TBR and kind of reading it between books. I enjoyed this installment in the Stormlight Archives. I would say it's probably my least favorite of the books, but that's saying something. The other 3 books I've read are some of my favorite books of all time, but I can also really respect what this book was trying to do. I would say a lot of the story was world building and kind of setting the pieces of all of the characters as well as the plot for the next installments within this series. I just feel like there was a lot of work done by Brandon Sanderson to kind of get us up to date with how structurally, how the science and the magic works in this world, but also just kind of moving characters in certain places and also have them go through some certain emotional journeys that will put us in a better place plot-wise for the next installment. I'm trying to be as vague as possible here because I don't want to give any spoilers. I will say the very tail end of the story, like the last little chunk, was an absolute roller coaster. And what Brandon Sanderson revealed to us, not only about the Stormlight Archives, but the Cosmere in general, got me very excited. And the epilogue of this book left me absolutely reeling. So while I feel like a large chunk of this was really kind of setting the table, a lot of world building, the ending was like, here's a whole bunch of information, do with it what you will. Another element of the story I do enjoy was that I do feel like we got some perspectives of characters we don't usually spend a lot of time with. I'm thinking Navani, I'm thinking Venali, and through their points of view, I feel like not only did we get kind of a larger view of the world itself, but again, we also kind of got a deeper understanding about how the magic and the science works in this world, which I thought was honestly pretty interesting. My favorite storyline within this book had to have been Adeline and Shallan. I really liked their journey in Shadesmere, and if anything, I want more about Shadesmere. I just think it's a really fascinating place, and kind of learning more about Spren culture and Spren government would be something I would really appreciate even more in future installments. But yeah, I enjoyed Rhythm of War. I really appreciated kind of what it was doing as it relates to the entirety of the Stormlight Archive. It's not my favorite book within this series, but I still really enjoyed reading it from beginning to end, and I would give it like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. Not quite 5-star, but still very close. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I read for the month of October. Let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!